to sleep without light. A sharp, childish and therefore especially irritating scream hit the temples like a hammer, causing another severe attack of headache. Like a rush, Maria had been suffering from migraines for many years, but the one that started a couple of hours ago seemed to break all possible records. Yet there was a competition for the worst headache. However, Maria had not thought in such categories for a long time, since she tried not to think at all. A deep, incessant, complete, even in rare moments of relief, dull aching pain engulfed her entire attention, leaving no room for desires or even irony. Tima, her 3-year-old son, shouted. He continued to scream even when she entered his room and turned on the light. And he stood in front of her on his bed in blue pajamas, with a stuffed bunny in his right hand. Before the evil words broke out, Maria managed to clench her jaw tightly, releasing only a barely audible hiss. Ultimately, she considered herself a good mother, perhaps not the best, but certainly not the one who lashes out at her child for no particular reason. "Okay, a little louder than I wanted," Maria whispered. "I'll leave the night light on, but you lie down and shut up right now." Tim's face, wet from sweat and tears, trembled, but it seemed he understood that trying to negotiate a better offer could lead to trouble. "Sorry, Mommy, I'm afraid, without light, when you leave." A new batch of tears rolled down the baby's face, but he no longer screamed, and Maria, closing her eyes tightly, forced herself not to notice it. Nothing. Sleep. Turning on the nightlight on the table that she had previously purchased for her son for future homework, she turned off the overhead light and left the room, tightly closing the door behind her. "I forgot to kiss," she remembered, but she didn't want to go back. The more pain she felt, the more disgusted she was by the smell of the children's room, and she hurried to leave it before the disgust turned into another outburst of anger, because she was still a good mother. Despite the fact that her son spent the night with her only 2 or 3 times a month, spending the rest of the time with his grandparents, the room still smelled of something sickly sweet, sticking to the teeth, like pieces of disgusting sticky cotton candy. Maria hated the smell. A few steps separated the nursery from the kitchen, where on one of the shelves covered with crumbs and pieces of foil from wrappers lay the coveted blister of ibuprofen. Slightly staggering and stepping over things scattered here and there right on the floor, shoes, an umbrella, toys and other rubbish, Maria made it to the kitchen, squeezed 3 500-milligram tablets into her palm at once and swallowed them in one gulp, without washing them down, after which, sat down heavily on the chair, slightly hitting her back against the hardback. How did she end up here? When the headache became especially unbearable, this question popped up in her head more than any other. A typical 5-story building on the imaginary border of a residential area of Moscow once seemed like the ultimate dream for Maria. She was born in a village not far from Vologda, where she spent her entire childhood, caring for animals and a whole litter of her younger brothers and sisters. In an attempt to get out of there, she spent her youth running from the hostel to the university, and from the university to work, in order to save up for a long-term rental of a room within the city. 3 years ago she met her future husband, from whom she later gave birth. And now, it would seem, this is happiness. But at some point everything changed. A 3-room apartment that once seemed huge no longer seems huge. Even worse, it is shrinking day by day. Because of the child, his career stalled, and the husband began to travel for months on business trips. In his words, to earn more money for an apartment. But no progress was visible. But mistrust appeared, intensifying with each new ridiculous excuse about the importance of his work. Ordinary happiness turned into the same ordinary nightmare. Maria began to hate her husband, more and more, day by day. In fact, she gave her son to be raised by his parents in order to be left alone more often. But this did not help either. So how did I end up here? And will I always be here? She thought, and did not find consolation in the ambiguous answer. Because no one is given the ability to see the future, and the sight of the present depressed her. Time flowed through her palms, not leaving a speck of dust on them that she would like to remember. The son returned home only when the husband returned. This tradition arose on its own end. Like any tradition, it only caused Maria irritation. This time Tima arrived a little earlier than expected on Friday. According to the generally accepted formulation, this early return took place so that the son could help his mother prepare for his father returning from an almost 2-month business trip. However, in fact, everyone understood this because the husband's parents were tired of taking care of the child instead of the parents. Maria waited with horror for the return of her husband, whose train arrived on Sunday, because this meant that her son would not go anywhere on Monday. thereby taking away even those tiny crumbs of freedom that she had left. But it was not even the lack of freedom and prospects that frightened Maria most of all. The main problem was that when Tima was around, she could not sleep. Insomnia consumed her completely, and when the unsteady sleep nevertheless threw her into the abyss of oblivion, Tima would certainly wake up and begin to call her, scream, or simply make noise. This happened so often before and was repeated now that sleep became impossible for her. In constant anticipation that she was about to be woken up, she tossed and turned from side to side all night long and got up with the first rays of the gray Moscow dawn. Taking out a pack of cigarettes and a lighter from her pocket, Maria lit a cigarette and, without waiting for the ashes to begin to fall, without looking, she reached out to the window for an ashtray, which, recently, had become for her the only solution to life's problems. The ashes on her bottom faded and her emotions faded along with them. Fear receded and a blissful emptiness came in its place, seconds of which seemed to be the only worthwhile moment in life. This time there was no ashtray on the windowsill. Instead, the woman's fingers scratched only the thick, smoke-saturated air. Sobbing, she threw the ashes onto the floor and finally convinced herself to look back. The left hand in which she held the cigarette had almost healed only a small unevenness of the skin in the place where she had placed a burning cigarette before Tima's last visit made itself felt as an ugly white mark. Now she was touching the windowsill, which was empty except for dust. The silence, interrupted by the barely audible hum of the refrigerator, looked accusingly at how ugly burnt spots spread on the surface of the linoleum. Soon, Maria's gaze found the missing ashtray, hidden among a huge number of empty and half-empty bottles. The ashtray stood on the refrigerator, a small metal devil, sitting on one of her metal sides and serving as a convenient handle, looked mockingly at his careless owner, who was looking for him where he was not, having stood up and made sure that punishment in the form of another outbreak of pain would not follow. Maria quickly took the ashtray, extinguished the cigarette but that had managed to burn out to the filter, and examined the loss with suspicion. Lately, this has happened really often. 2 locks on the door. Maria rarely locked them at the same time, but several times she returned home to find that the lock was not the one that she remembered was locked in the morning. Things changed their location, and even more often, soap, powder, pens, notebooks. Did anyone other than her come into the apartment? Or did she just forget which lock was locked? A question without an answer always turns into a rhetorical one. After smoking until 1 in the morning and completely exhausted, Maria climbed into bed and closed her eyes. All last night she had been unable to snatch even a minute of sleep. But now, fatigue seemed to be finally winning, and dreams were gradually filling her mind's eye with eerie and restless visions. She knew it wouldn't last long, but she hadn't slept in 2 days, and even 10 minutes would give her tired brain more rest than spending the whole night last night in the company of the ever-disappearing ashtray. A thunderclap shook the fragile plastic windows. The cheap crystal chandelier rattled barely audibly as if half asleep and calmed down a second later. But Maria had already woken up and jerked to her feet, at the same time wrapping herself in a thick velvet robe. My back felt an unpleasant pain, as always with such a sharp rise. I'm already 30. An uninvited thought flashed faster than she could stop it. And a second later, the main reason for awakening reached Maria, of course. Tima woke up and cried. He was afraid of a thunderstorm with hysterical, insane fear, and his stupid, disgustingly childish reaction made Maria grind her teeth with impotent anger. I'm cute here, she shouted when another clap of thunder swept over the horizon. I'm on my way. Tripping over a lone shoe standing in the middle of the room, the woman reached the children's bedroom and, before she could touch the door, she felt her son fly into her arms with her whole body, automatically hugging him and stroking his head. She felt the pungent smell of his sweat. Nothing, dear. It's just rain. It won't hurt you. Internal disgust won, and she quickly pulled the child away from her, holding him by the shoulders with her hands, but not letting go, because this is what a good mother should do. Why are you scared again? She asked as kindly as possible, although the obviousness of the answer infuriated her even more than the need to ask this stupid question. The light went out. The boy answered. It's okay, honey. It's just light. I'm here. Mom is nearby. His stuttering. Oh yes, also this problem. The teachers insisted on making an appointment with a children's speech therapist, which meant another unaffordable expense for their family. But if he continues to stutter by the end of school, then there will probably be problems with graduation. But what's more, it's not a fact that he will even be accepted into the army, and to live with him longer than he came of age. Maria herself later became sick of this thought. An involuntary laugh broke through her tightly clenched jaws, and Maria almost cried with relief, because Tima could not read her thoughts. Nothing, honey. Mom has a flashlight. Walking her son back to bed, she picked up the blanket that had been thrown on the floor and shook it thoroughly. A sudden loud knock almost made her heart stop. A mobile phone fell out of the folds of the blanket onto the floor. "Did you take my phone?" Maria asked in a calm tone, biting her lip a little harder than she should for someone who is not angry with her thieving child. "And no, I didn't take it. You probably forgot. Be on the bed." "Yes, maybe. In any case, the device is password protected." She decided not to aggravate the night with a scandal. Having given her son a flashlight, which she always kept near the nursery, and advising him not to make any more noise, Maria returned to her bed. The phone was dead, so she left it herself. "Right, you little liar." Having connected the device to the charger and turned it on, Maria unlocked it and went into the internet history. Having made sure that nothing unnecessary had appeared there, she began, out of habit, to throw old photographs into the archive, despite the dryness and pain in her eyes. Drowsiness did not come, leaving room for only empty and vague anxiety. My heart beat hard against my ribs in anticipation of my son's next cry. After all, he won't let her sleep. I never did. The husband claimed that their son slept just fine. Maria envied him his fantasy, or lies, whatever his choice. Accidentally clicking on the video gallery icon, Maria was already reaching for the close button of the application when her finger froze. Never reaching the button, she had never used her phone as a camera, but the entire gallery was filled with videos. They had no names, only dates of creation. The last date was today. Feeling faint from her heart racing even faster, Maria pressed the play button. The screen was flooded with darkness. This was the theme. He sat wrapped in a blanket, like an ancient Greek poet's toga, and directed the flashlight at himself. Choking on tears, with one hand, he covered his mouth, gaping in horror, as if preventing a scream from escaping, and with the other hand he wiped away his tears. It seems that he did not intend to turn on the recording. He only needed light, but he did not know how to use the phone and left everything as it was, too scared to call for help. Something else was going on. With her eyes wide open, Maria finally saw what her son was screaming about. It was not a thunderstorm. Some barely discernible movement. A third hand appeared behind his back. An adult, twisted, trembling, a thin, round scar from a cigarette burn stood out clearly against the parchment white skin. She reached for Artyom's throat, grabbed it, but did not squeeze. As if playing, there was the sound of a phone charging, and a second later the camera turned off. Maria jumped up, snatching the phone from the charger and throwing it aside like a poisonous snake. She looked in horror at her scarred right hand, squeezing and unclenching it, as if not believing that she could still control it. "Mommy?" Tima stood on the threshold of the room, clutching a stuffed bunny in his trembling hands. "It's you?" "Yes, dear. Of course I. Why did you kill me, Mommy?" A bell rang in the corridor. The husband returned, but the son disappeared. The woman's head began to spin more and more. Her eyes rolled back. Another day of insomnia ended, and she fell to the floor, losing consciousness to something completely different. Maria's lips spread into an inhuman, creepy grin. The last remnants of the mind of the former owner of this body burned in the fire of madness. She was finally free, as she had always dreamed of. "I'm coming," she shouted, taking a long meat knife out of the kitchen drawer when the doorbell rang again. She used to be a good mother. It's time to be a good wife.